Everything falls. That's one of the most basic truths humans have believed since childhood. We live our whole lives under the influence of gravity, to the point where we almost forget it exists. But what would happen if, in some places on Earth, those familiar rules began to show signs of abnormality? There are roads where cars roll uphill on their own. There are areas where people constantly describe feeling lighter or heavier than normal. There are scientific measurements that record small but difficult to explain deviations in the local gravitational field. The scary thing isn't that gravity is wrong. The scary thing is that we may not fully understand it yet. And today's story will take us to 5 strange places where the most obvious things begin to become incomprehensible. Nestled among the mountains of central Norway lies a small valley called Hesdalen. Looking at a map, it doesn't seem particularly remarkable. It's sparsely populated, has a cold climate, and for much of the year is shrouded in near-total tranquility. But it is precisely this silence that makes the unusual occurrences in Hesdalen even more striking. For decades, locals have repeatedly reported seeing luminous spheres in the sky. These lights sometimes hover for hours in mid-air. Sometimes they move very slowly, then suddenly accelerate in unpredictable directions. Some witnesses say the spheres seem to appear out of nowhere and then disappear without a trace. Initially, many dismissed it as a rare atmospheric phenomenon. Some believed it was simply an observational error. However, the increasing number of reports made it impossible for researchers to ignore. Survey teams began arriving in Hesdalen. They brought radar, magnetometers, high-sensitivity cameras, and other advanced equipment in the hope of finding an explanation for the mysterious lights. But the more they studied it, the more they realized that the light might not be the only strange thing about this place. Several research groups have noted physical variations that are difficult to fully explain using conventional geological models. In certain areas of the valley, measurements reveal small discrepancies in the local gravitational field. These changes are not large enough to overturn the laws of physics, but they are sufficient to attract the attention of those looking for any anomalies. And this is where things get confusing, because measurement data isn't the only thing that appears repeatedly. Many longtime residents of Hesdalen have recounted very similar experiences. Some describe feeling their bodies become lighter when passing through certain areas of the valley. Others say they feel as if an invisible weight is pulling them down to the ground. Of course, human perception isn't always accurate. Our bodies can be affected by weather, terrain, altitude, or psychological state. But what caught the researchers' attention was the remarkable repetition in those accounts. People who had never met each other still described similar experiences. Stories told years apart still share similar details. And when field data began to reveal some anomalies, those accounts became even more noteworthy. Imagine yourself standing in a vast valley on a Nordic night. Mountains shrouded in darkness surround you. There are no car noises, no city lights. Only the cold wind blowing across the slopes and the feeling that nature is concealing something beneath its familiar surface. That's the feeling Hesdalen evokes in many people. Interestingly, to this day, there is still no single explanation universally accepted by all scientists for the phenomena occurring here. Some hypotheses focus on the geological characteristics of the area. Others study electromagnetic interactions within the Earth's interior. And there are still unanswered questions. But perhaps the greatest lesson from Hesdalen doesn't lie in the light spheres or the numbers on the measuring instruments. The lesson lies in the fact that nature doesn't necessarily operate in the simple way we expect. Sometimes, even in the most seemingly ordinary places on the planet, phenomena exist that continue to challenge science. And if Hesdalen makes us question what we know, the next location takes things even further. Because on a mountain in Germany, ancient legends and physical data seem to be meeting in an unexpected way. Nestled in Germany's Harz Mountains lies a peak long shrouded in mystery. Its name is Brocken. For centuries, locals have believed this is where witches gather on the darkest nights of the year. Ancient legends tell of giant figures appearing from the mist, of strange shapes hovering in the sky, and of phenomena that make anyone who sets foot here feel uneasy. Today, most of those stories are considered products of folk imagination. But what is remarkable is that Brocken continues to interest researchers, not because of the legend, but because of the real, observable phenomena. The most famous of these is the phenomenon known as the Brocken ghost. Imagine you're standing on a high mountain peak early in the morning. A thick sea of fog stretches before you. The sun is behind you. Suddenly, a giant human-shaped shadow appears in the fog. That shadow can be many times larger than your actual size. It moves with you. Sometimes it is surrounded by rings of multicolored light, like a giant halo. In the past, those who witnessed this phenomenon often believed they were seeing spirits or supernatural entities. But modern science has shown that this is an optical phenomenon created when light, fog, and the viewing angle combine in a particular way. It seemed as though the mystery was over. But that wasn't the strangest thing. As researchers conducted deeper surveys of the Brocken area and surrounding geological regions, they found some features that weren't entirely uniform as expected. Measurements of the gravitational field at various points revealed notable variations related to the underlying structure. In fact, small-scale gravitational variations are not uncommon. They occur in many places around the world due to differences in rock density, minerals located deep beneath the surface, or ancient geological structures. However, at Brocken, some data suggest that these variable regions are distributed in patterns that continue to raise questions among researchers, and this is when local stories begin to resurface. For years, tourists and residents living near the area have repeatedly reported on roads where vehicles seem to roll uphill on their own. Many claim to have witnessed this phenomenon firsthand. At first glance, this seems like a direct challenge to the laws of physics. But when scientists surveyed the terrain, they discovered that most of these places were actually gravity hills, where the surrounding landscape creates a powerful visual illusion. The human eye is tricked about the horizon, making a downhill slope appear as if it were uphill. Technically, the car is still rolling downhill, but the brain perceives the opposite. So, is the story over yet? Not necessarily. The most interesting thing about Brocken isn't about which phenomena are real and which are hallucinations. The interesting thing is that they both coexist in the same space. On one side are optical phenomena that have been explained by physics. On one side are geological and gravity data that are still being studied to better understand the structure beneath the mountain. For centuries, locals have recounted strange sensations experienced while passing through this area. They had no gravimeters. They had no radar or modern geological models. All they have is what their eyes see and what their bodies feel. It's possible that many stories have been exaggerated over time, but it's also possible that some of it stems from first-hand observations that science is only just beginning to understand. Could there be complex geological structures beneath Brocken that we haven't yet explored? Could small physical variations in the environment contribute to legends that have lasted for centuries? To date, no one has a complete answer, but Brocken left behind an important lesson. Sometimes, legends don't just appear out of nowhere. Sometimes, behind seemingly mysterious stories lies a real phenomenon waiting to be deciphered. And if Brocken showed how humans can be deceived by what they see, the next location poses an even stranger question. What would happen if the human body itself began to sense changes that scientific equipment could also detect? Dozens of kilometers east of Peru's capital, Lima, lies a rocky plateau situated at an altitude of over 4,000 meters above sea level. This place is called Marcahuasi. From the very first glance, Marcahuasi gives the feeling of belonging to another world. Across the plateau lie colossal rock formations, eroded by wind and time over thousands of years. Some rocks resemble human faces. Others look like ancient monuments carved by a long-vanished civilization. As fog rolled through the mountain passes and darkness gradually enveloped the plateau, the landscape became even more eerie. Therefore, for decades, Marcahuasi has been the focus of countless mysterious stories. But what interested the researchers wasn't just the strange rock formations. That's what people feel when they move through this area. Many tourists have described an experience that is difficult to explain. After just a few steps, they feel an unusual change in their bodies. Some say they suddenly feel lighter, as if moving becomes easier. Others feel their limbs heavy, even though they have just stepped into an area not far away. At first glance, this might not seem too surprising. In any case, Marcahuasi is located at a high altitude. The thin air can affect heart rate, breathing ability, and overall bodily sensations. But that wasn't what caught the scientists' attention. It is noteworthy that many people described similar sensations in nearly identical locations, even though they had no prior knowledge of the local stories. This repetition has led some research groups to begin questioning it. Are those feelings merely psychological effects? Or is the environment here actually changing in some way that the human body can perceive? To understand the problem, detailed geophysical surveys were conducted across various areas of the plateau. Researchers are mapping local gravitational fields with increasing accuracy. They measure the distribution of mass beneath the rock's surface. They analyze geological structures formed millions of years ago. And the results began to reveal a much more complex picture than had previously been thought. Some areas exhibit distinct geological transition zones. Beneath the surface are rock structures with varying densities, creating small variations in the local gravitational field. These variations are not large enough to produce extreme changes like those in science fiction stories. However, these findings are sufficient to show that the physical environment at Marcahuasi is not entirely uniform. And this is where things get interesting, because in some cases, the locations where tourists often describe unusual sensations show a striking similarity to areas that record changes in geophysical data. That doesn't mean every experience is caused by gravity. Current science has not yet reached such a conclusion. But the correlation between human perception and objective measurements has opened up a fascinating question. Are our bodies more sensitive to our surroundings than we think? Imagine the human body as an incredibly complex sensor system developed over millions of years of evolution. The heart is constantly reacting to pressure. The inner ear constantly monitors balance. The brain is constantly processing millions of signals from the environment that we are not even aware of. If tiny changes in temperature, pressure, or magnetic fields can affect human perception, could subtle variations in the gravitational field leave a similar mark? That's a question that's still under research, because gravity doesn't just determine whether we stand firmly on the ground. Gravity affects blood circulation. Gravity affects the functioning of the nervous system. Gravity affects how the body orients itself in space. Even experiments in a zero-gravity environment in orbit have shown how strongly the human brain and body react when gravitational conditions change. That makes Marcahuasi a fascinating natural laboratory, a place where the lines between subjective perception and scientific data begin to intersect. Many experiences here may simply be a result of the terrain, altitude, and mindset. But it's also possible that the human body is recognizing environmental signals far more subtly than we previously imagined. And if Marcahuasi showed that humans can sense the invisible changes around them, then the next location is even stranger. Because in Siberia, there exists a huge lake that generations of local residents have believed is more than just a lake. They believe it is alive. And what led them to believe this may be related to the mysterious oscillations that appear deep beneath the lake's surface. In the heart of Russia's vast Siberia lies a lake so ancient that it has witnessed the changing geological eras, that is, Lake Baikal. With a depth of over 1,600 meters, Lake Baikal is not only the deepest freshwater lake in the world, but also one of the most unique ecosystems ever known. Its waters contain approximately 1/5 of the planet's unfreezing fresh water. Many of the species that live in the lake do not exist anywhere else on Earth, but it is precisely this almost infinite depth that makes Baikal a mystery. Imagine you're standing on the surface of a lake in winter. A thick layer of ice stretches to the horizon. Beneath that ice lies more than a kilometer of dark water. And even deeper are colossal geological structures formed over millions of years of Earth's crustal movement. For many years, scientists have used increasingly sophisticated equipment to study what is happening beneath the lake, and then they discovered something unusual. In some areas, geophysical measurements have recorded small fluctuations related to the distribution of mass beneath the lakebed. Notably, these fluctuations appear in relatively stable cycles. At first glance, it doesn't seem particularly special. The world's large lakes are influenced by a variety of factors: including tides, geological activity, groundwater flow, and temperature fluctuations. But when the data was analyzed in more detail, some patterns emerged that didn't quite fit the familiar explanations. Some oscillation cycles do not correspond clearly to tidal effects. Some of these changes are also not easily related to well-understood geological patterns, and this is where folktales begin to get interesting. For generations, communities living around Lake Baikal have held it in special reverence. Many legends describe Baikal as a living entity. Some stories say the lake has a breath of its own. Others claim it has a mood of its own, sometimes peaceful, sometimes turbulent and unpredictable. Of course, science doesn't consider those legends as evidence. But there is a question worth pondering. Why do similar descriptions appear across different generations? Why do so many people, living hundreds of years apart, still use very similar imagery to describe the same lake? The answer may lie in what they observed. Baikal is truly an extremely dynamic natural system. The lake is constantly changing under the influence of deep water currents, geological activity, and processes that are still being studied by humans. For those who have lived around the lake their whole lives, these subtle changes can create the feeling that they are witnessing something with its own rhythm. Imagine a massive body of water containing thousands of cubic kilometers of fresh water. Imagine the slow movements taking place in the darkness at the bottom of the lake, where sunlight never reaches. And imagine the silent geological forces at work beneath all of that. In that context, the idea of a lake breathing no longer sounds as strange as it initially did. Baikal reminds us that sometimes folklore records a phenomenon before science has the tools to accurately measure and describe it. Legends may not be literally true, but sometimes they reflect a real experience accumulated over generations of observation. And if Baikal makes us wonder whether nature has rhythms we don't yet fully understand, the final stop on this journey goes even further than that. Because in one of the harshest environments on the planet, researchers have begun to question something even more fundamental than gravity. They began to question time itself. If there's any place on Earth that looks more like a foreign planet than humanity's home planet, it's probably Danakil. Located between Ethiopia, Eritrea, and Djibouti, the Danakil Depression is one of the harshest environments ever recorded. Temperatures frequently exceed levels that most humans can tolerate for extended periods. The land is covered in vast stretches of white salt that extend to the horizon. Boiling acid lakes constantly spew toxic gases. Beneath this seemingly immovable surface, the Earth is silently and gradually separating. Imagine you are standing in the middle of this land. There are no trees, there is no shade. There was only heat rising from the ground, and it felt as if the planet itself was revealing its most primitive core. It is this unique environment that has made Danakil a location of interest to geologists and geophysicists around the world. During the research, several surveys have documented fascinating variations related to the complex geological structure deep beneath this area. Layers of rock with varying densities, ongoing tectonic activity, and the continuous movement of the Earth's crust create an incredibly complex physical picture. That, in itself, is not unusual. But this leads to a bigger question. If gravity can vary even slightly between different areas, does that mean time also changes accordingly? According to Einstein's theory of relativity, gravity and time are not two separate things. They are linked in such a profound way that a change in one will affect the other. In a stronger gravitational field, time flows more slowly. In a weaker gravitational field, time flows more quickly. Today, that effect has been confirmed by extremely precise atomic clocks. Even a change in altitude of just a few meters can allow modern equipment to detect very small differences in the rate at which time passes. And this is where things become thought-provoking. Because whenever scientists study areas with complex gravitational structures like the Danakil, they're not just studying geology, they're also studying how space and time are shaped by the very planet we live on. The differences observed here are not significant enough to make people intuitively perceive time passing faster or slower. But physically, that principle is still present around us every second of every minute. This led to a surprising realization. Time is not a uniform flow everywhere. It is stretchable. It can change. It can react to the very structure of reality. Danakil is therefore not just a hot and harsh land. It serves as a reminder that what we perceive as fixed can be far more complex than it appears. And when we study gravity, we're not simply studying why a rock falls to the ground. We are studying what shapes the motion of planets, the workings of galaxies, and even the rate at which time passes. In other words, we are touching upon one of the deepest layers of reality, and the biggest question remains. Is what we know about gravity today the complete picture, or just the beginning of a much larger mystery? 5 locations, the mysterious year. These 5 reminders show that this world still holds much beyond what we can see and explain. From Hesdalen to Brocken, from Marcahuasi to Baikal and Danakil, each place reveals the same truth. Nature is always vaster than human understanding. In modern life, we often believe that technology can solve all problems. We are accustomed to control, calculate, and predict. But the deeper we delve into the mysteries of nature, the more we realize that humans are not at the center of everything. Nature existed long before we appeared. And the laws governing the universe are still silently at work, whether or not humans understand them. Perhaps that is why the most valuable thing we learn from these places is not a new scientific formula. It's humility. Humility is key to acknowledging that there are still things we don't know. Humility means respecting nature instead of trying to conquer everything, and the humility to reflect on how we are living our own lives. Because when people live too far removed from nature, chasing desires, competition, and short-term gains, we gradually lose the ability to feel the deepest things in life. Perhaps true harmony doesn't lie in controlling nature. Perhaps harmony lies in living in accordance with the good principles of nature and human morality. Live more authentically. Live a more virtuous life. Live with more patience and tolerance in the face of life's ups and downs. Because no matter how far science advances, a good society is always built upon people with good character. And who knows, when humans learn to live in harmony with nature and live according to the values of truth, compassion, and tolerance, we may not only understand the world better, and it also helps me understand myself better. That may well be the greatest journey of discovery that every human being must undertake. If you enjoy stories exploring the mysteries of the world, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next videos. Each week, we'll delve deeper into strange phenomena, unsolved mysteries, and the biggest questions about humanity, nature, and the universe.